Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going, and as I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. What happens in a courtroom, and indeed what happens in a congressional hearing, matters tremendously. We believe in the American system of justice. It's true that occasionally that system fails us, but overall the system works. Let's begin with Donald Trump. Over the weekend, we got all the reaction to Donald Trump's conviction on 34 felony counts. He is now a convicted felon, and he is set to be the Republican nominee for President of the United States. What interests me is not the case itself, but the absolute denunciation of the action by the court by Republicans on all levels, and the division the polls indicate over how the American people feel about a court decision. The undermining of American justice bothers me. The attacks on our legal system disturb me greatly. Our Constitution and our legal system represent the bedrock of democracy. There is nothing more critical in a democracy, aside from voting, than our belief in the jury system, that peers sit on a jury and make a judgment. I must tell you that I am very disappointed that the Republicans seem to be in lockstep. They are determined to undermine what the jury did in the case of Donald Trump. Well, if they are not willing to accept a judgment by a jury of peers, 34 counts of guilt against Donald Trump, well, there's something seriously wrong with the Republican Party. They're going to have to take a long, hard look at why it is that they are so cynical and why they are allowing the legal system in this great republic to be undermined. There is another case coming to a courtroom in Delaware. It has to do with Hunter Biden. Now, we know that Hunter Biden was an addict. We know that he bought a gun when he shouldn't have bought a gun. We know that he filled out papers and didn't tell the truth. We know that addicts sometimes do things that are irrational, that make no sense. And it needs to be understood that they are addicts and that they have a sickness. What's interesting to me is that the Hunter Biden case is being blown up to the point that you would think that it was Hunter Biden who was president of the United States, not Joe Biden. We have had other members of presidential families who have had problems, difficulties. I think particularly of Don Nixon, Richard Nixon's brother. I think of Billy Carter, Jimmy Carter's brother. I think of others who have been exposed to all sorts of issues and problems. But I don't believe that Joe Biden should be judged by what his son did. You all know I have two sons. I want to assure you that although I've tried to raise them in a proper way, along with my beloved wife Ellen, I can tell you that I am not responsible for their individual actions. They make mistakes. I'm very lucky that my sons, our sons, never were victims of addiction. But I will tell you that if they were, I would stand by my sons the same way Joe Biden and Jill Biden are standing with their son. Anyone listening to the sound of my voice who has had a child who has any problem, any difficulty, any encounter, you know that they are responsible for their own actions. But you also know that you love them and that you will do everything you can to stand with them. That is what Joe and Jill Biden are doing. And I don't believe that this case should be a case that should be considered in the 2024 presidential election. If it were Joe Biden, well, that would be a different matter. And all of those who now call for drug tests because they believe that Joe Biden is all hipped up on drugs in order to function ought to be ashamed of themselves. It is sad that this double standard applies. And there is another case, a hearing, that will take place beginning today in the Congress. And Dr. Fauci is going to be on the witness stand. The Republicans are making a case against Dr. Fauci based on their belief that if he didn't create the virus, he certainly encouraged it, that what he did was to restrict civil liberties. His recommendations are viewed as a disaster by the Republicans because they have to blame somebody. It is interesting to note that the President of the United States, when Dr. Fauci was so critical, was Donald Trump, a Republican. Do you think that the hearing will go after Donald Trump? By the way, let me be crystal clear. I don't believe that anybody should be gone after in the case of COVID. It was an American tragedy and continues to be an American tragedy and will no doubt continue for the long term to be an American tragedy. But this is not a time for blame game, and certainly the implication that COVID was the product of Dr. Fauci is ridiculous. I say this because these three cases are in the headlines. And one was adjudicated by a jury of peers, the Trump case. The other will be adjudicated by a jury of peers, Hunter Biden. And the third, Dr. Fauci, isn't exactly a trial, but the intent of congressional Republicans is to determine Dr. Fauci's guilt or innocence. It is interesting to note that the weaponization of the American legal system, the weaponization of Congress, is part of the history of our country. But we need to be reasonable, logical, and knowledgeable about what matters and what doesn't. I believe this so strongly because my belief in the American system is based, in the end, on the idea that truth will prevail. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World. I am John Rothman. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand. Of course, you can follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn, but I especially want to thank the wonderful producer of this podcast, Gogo Zoger. She makes sure that Around the Political World with John Rothman is up and running every single weekday. Thanks, Gogo. I'll see you all tomorrow. Who knows where the world will be when we meet again.